Wow, it's just so thrilling to see so many people come out for this really great event. And thanks, David, for all the work that went into organizing it. And I teach in humanities and history. I'm very fortunate to have so many of these people as colleagues and you guys as members of our student population. I didn't prepare a written text. I didn't prepare PowerPoint slides just because I'm going to talk very briefly. But I'm going to talk about the Vikings. And I wanted to say that, now when we think about the Vikings, I mean, what do you guys think about? Like, what's a couple of things that come to mind? I can't, by the way, I'm visually impaired, so just shout it out. What do you think about the Vikings?
Strong men.
Strong men, okay. What else? Vikings? Football, yeah. How about anything else?
Bloodlust.
Bloodlust, okay.
Pillaging.
So, pillaging, exactly. I would say, yeah, all those things applied, but of course there were women. Vikings could also be very peaceful. Vikings were also farmers. Now, so they were complex people. And what I was thinking about that when David talked about how to really kind of have a chance at saving the planet, we have to turn to the ancients. And a lot of people think, I wouldn't use the Vikings as a model for that, because the Vikings actually were pretty reckless when they would go to new places to colonize. And I'm going to talk about one of those places in a second. Now, and that, of course, is Greenland. So, now, I wanted to kind of just backtrack just a tiny bit and say I also do a lot of Viking reenactment recently because we have a Viking house on campus. And Viking reenactment, so people who, like to learn how to do things like the Vikings did, like woodworking and cooking over a fire, and who get together at festivals and wear Viking clothes that they themselves have sewn. I mean, the people who do that reenactment is really popular. They always say that they do it because they want to go back to the old ways that's more sustainable and kinder to the environment. And so there's this idea that just because people lived 1,000 years ago that they were more environmentally sustainable. I have to say that's not true. Because if you look at the Vikings, they moved to a different region of the world and they moved their subsistence strategy. So the way that they lived in Norway, they decided to colonize in another area of the world, Greenland, and bring their cattle raising and farming strategies and dependence on wood and charcoal and all those things to a part of the world that was not appropriate for those things. And that, of course, is, Iceland and Greenland. And those places are, of course, subarctic. But when the Vikings went to those places, let's call it 1000 AD, we were at the end of that point at a climate optimum. So the seas had been calmer, it had been warmer for about 300 years, which made the Viking Age possible in the first place. So when the Vikings found these areas, they're like, oh, they're so green. It reminds us of Norway. There's so many plants and trees. But of course, what they didn't really understand was that once you use those things, they have to regenerate. And so when the Vikings first got to those places, they brought their cattle with them. They, of course, came on ships, and of course, to get home, you needed more wood. They needed things like oak and pine. But of course, the types of trees that you would find in places like Iceland and Greenland were these scrubby little birch trees, You can't make a proper ship out of that. So they basically pretty quickly stripped the land. Right? And then, of course, the climate shifted and got colder. And so the problem ensued that they became dependent for imports on ships coming from all the way from Norway, thousands of miles away, across the North Atlantic. Oh, come on, that means that they're going to, and what happens if you got a season of really stormy seas? Well, the Norwegian king is going to be, I'll take my ships to England instead. I'm not going to take them to Iceland or Greenland. So those communities became isolated, from the old world. But they still depended on this old world, old Norwegian style of life. So they wore wool clothes, which means you have to have sheep. They still wanted to use wood in their fires. They did start building in field stones and using some of the local stuff. But the problem is that they couldn't fully transition. Right? And so by the time we get to the 15th century, several things have happened. You've had the Black Death in Europe in the 14th century. You've had a lot of global climate warm or cold, ensuing. So, it became really difficult to get across the North Atlantic using 15th century shipping techniques. And so the last recorded Norwegian medieval voyage to the Greenland communities was in the early 15th century, and they record what they found was in abandoned farms, right, where people had simply gone away. Now, could they have saved these communities? Yeah, because there are people who do live in those places, who have lived in those places. Let's take Greenland, of course. The Inuit, they live according to old ways. And so when when Professor Velker is talking about going back to the ancients, right? I mean, we're really talking about people who know how to use the land because that is their land. And it doesn't mean that other people can't go to that land, and travel to that land and live there. But what it means is the Vikings who had gone to, let's say, Greenland, if only they had really learned how to live like the local people did, right? To hunt maybe seal or to wear local fur, because of course, you can't really raise sheep or cattle or expect to have a lot of wood if you're living in a place like Greenland. So this is just one lesson about how, what can happen, when people don't really draw upon the local practice and the indigenous ways of life. So anyway, I don't know how much time I took because I can't see, but I'm done probably early.
Well, if folks have questions, that would be all right, and I can help recognize.
Yeah, that would be fabulous. Or questions for any of the other speakers too would be fine as well.
I have a question for Professor Sherman.
Yeah, of course.
So that horrific image, if they come back and farms are all abandoned, did they go away or did they die because of ecological collapse?
They died.
Oh, okay.
They died, yeah. I mean, the communities got smaller. In terms of who knows exactly, because of course we don't have the primary sources. But the shipping from Norway to Greenland had really fallen off, right? I mean, there had been decades where there were no ships going to Greenland. So, a really good educated guess is that the communities simply did die off, right? And so they were never big to begin with, but they became smaller and smaller over the course of hundreds of years.
Professor Austin?
This reminds me of a similar tale with Easter Island, where the forests were cut down.
Yeah.
They finally got to the point where they couldn't build the ships to be able to leave, but then they also couldn't sustain their life on the island and perished in that way. So we have the reminder of people who were there with these giant monolithic heads, but I mean, these are important case studies in which people ignorant of the ecosystem to which they're moving very easily destroy it.
Yeah, because that's a really great parallel, because I mean, of course, when the Norse, let's call them Norse, when they get to Greenland, I mean, it looks like Norway. I mean, at least the rich kind of agricultural regions of Norway. So from their perspective, they're doing something really smart. But when they understand, right, that when you understand that climate changes and that you can also impact it with human abuse of the climate, I mean, which we of course have the advantage of now today, right? So.
Other questions? Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Sherman.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.